We're going to call the meeting to order. Thank you. Yes, the clock is not correct. That one.
Keep you on your toes.
We'll start by calling for a motion and second to grab leave of absence to Commissioners Sempet and Strader, who are out of town.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, we'll call for votes for and against the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Next, we'll move to the minutes. I'll call for motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of September 13th, 2023.
So moved.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries, and we'll move to the executive director's report with Curtis.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, commissioners, port employees, guests. Nice to see everyone. I do want to highlight our group of new employees, both in the back row and on our YouTube channel, who are tracking the commission meeting today. We just got a chance to say hi to them this morning. Just another crop of really great recruits into the organization, and honestly helping us get better by bringing their own views and experience to the table. Just really excited about it. I would like to acknowledge the port's safety champions, if we could, on the overhead. We'll see where we go. Tim, Jeffrey, Casey, and Brandon this month. Congratulations. Thank you to all of you for watching out, not only for yourselves and your coworkers, but also for our business partners and travelers. Some really great examples of leadership on site. So thank you for that. I would like to ask Lanny Hill, who's one of our leaders in the airport fire department, to come up and do our safety moment for us this morning. Good morning, Lanny. Yeah, come on up right there.
My name is Laney Hill. I'm the Deputy Fire Marshal here at the Port of Portland. And I am here to present this month's fire prevention message, which is cooking safety. So I put a little presentation together for you all for us to review. Fire Prevention Week is October 8th through 14th, which we're just in the middle of right now. So we timed this perfectly, and Prevention Week was started by the National Fire Protection Agency in 1922 to commemorate the Great Chicago Fire. In 1925, President Calvin Coolidge proclaimed the first National Fire Prevention Week to occur from October 4th to October 10th. This is the longest standing recognition in the nation. So Fire Prevention Week, every year, we send out a lot of information over Yammer, which is our internal news and communication link. And this year's, like I said, this year's prevention message is cooking safety starts with you. According to the NFPA, cooking is the leading cause of home fires, with nearly half, around 49% of all home fires involving cooking equipment. Cooking is also the leading cause of home fire injuries. Unattended cooking is the leading cause of home cooking fires and related deaths. Ranges and cooktops were involved in 61% of reported home cooking fires, 87% of cooking fire deaths, and 78% of cooking fire injuries. More than 1/4 of the people killed by cooking fires were sleeping at the time of the incident. So once again, cooking safety does start with you. And if we move to the next slide, some cooking safety messages we put together from the NFPA. Always keep a close eye on what you're cooking. For foods with longer cook times, such as those that are simmering, baking, and setting a timer, is always a good reminder that things are in the oven. Clear the cooking area of combustibles. That includes any clothing, any other cooking equipment, anything flammable next to your cooking appliances. Turn the pot handles towards the back of the stove. I think we've all learned this several, when we first started cooking. It's for the safety of you and the people around you, small children, animals. It's always good to turn those handles back to the back part of the wall. Also, always keep a lid nearby. Instead of having to remove a burning pan, you can always just slip a lid right over it to smother that fire. Create a kid and pet friendly zone. Keep 3 feet around the cooking area and anywhere else hot food and drink is prepared and or carried. Staying in the kitchen, using a timer and avoiding distractions that remove your focus from what's on the stove is a very good rule to follow. I did try to come up with a song, Stand By Your Pan. I'm not a good singer and I will not be singing that today, but
Laney.
if you leave the kitchen, turn off the burner or stay in the kitchen while you're cooking. That's
Great. I do want to hear the song though. Maybe Keith, are you ready to? All right, we'll sing later. Thank you, Laney. Really appreciate the
You're
message this morning. I did honestly just reading the slide. Are we going to get to someone going to sing it? That's great. You may notice on this slide and around the building a new look at the port after about 2 years since we revisited our mission, which is up here on the wall. We did launch a new community-centered brand a couple weeks ago at the port. I'm really excited about it. It's the idea of it is about confluence and bringing people and trade together for the benefit of our community. The overhead view of the logo is essentially mimics the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia River, harkens back not only to our history, but our present. I'm really excited about it. The identity is intended to be a signal of what we're about. It's to reflect our values. And so we've talked organizationally about living our brand and really reflecting the brand in what we do and what we do in the brand. So I'm just thrilled about it. You'll see more of it in the slides later today, but it's just beautiful. I do just a shout out to entire comms team, but Jen Wick, who led on the creative side for our team, is really spectacular. It just really reflects great teamwork to make this happen and a lot of work going into it. So I'm just thrilled. Finally, last month, I was able to join our 2 commissioners sitting over here, Lam and Luther, to visit with the Vietnamese Prime Minister in San Francisco. We went down with a delegation from Oregon. It was actually really interesting and rewarding. Not only representatives of Bambuza and Columbia Sportswear, but also Nike and Dragonberry Produce and Intel to talk about the impact and the opportunity of Vietnam and Oregon working together in the future. As I think folks have heard before, we think that connectivity is really important. It's a nice size market for us and a lot of aligned values. So more work to do there, but it was a great visit and we're looking forward to more of that to come. So with that, Madam President, I'll conclude my comments this morning.
Thank you, Curtis. Excuse me, any questions or comments for Curtis on his report? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the Executive Director's report. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We didn't receive public comment this month, so we'll move on to our first general discussion item, and I'll call on Tim Coyle to introduce it. Okay, thank you, Keith.
Good morning. So just a little bit of historic context before I introduce Brianne. We've been working on our economic impact analysis for the better part of the last year or so. Tim Quayle, who is our Director of Business Analytics, and Brianne Quayle, who is our economist and business strategy person that sits within my division. Just for structural, Tim sits in the finance group with IT and reports up through Antoinette, and really is bringing a lot of kind of new innovative approaches around business intelligence, business analytics. And Brianne is our expert on how you drive economic analysis into the community. And these are really 2 key components to driving on a new mission around shared prosperity. What you're going to hear today is really a combination of conventional work. We've always done economic impact analysis. We have to do it. It's important for us to make the pitch around grants and other programs for investment into the port, and certainly with our new Trade and Economic Development Division that's focused on the general fund and financial health of the organization, we absolutely have to make the kind of the tax revenue return on investment pitch here at the region and the state level, and certainly the federal level as well. So that's the conventional part of the study. But with our new mission, Tim and Brianne really were challenged to say, what more can we do to dig into the questions around who's benefiting? And, instead of macro kind of economic output data, let's get further into workforce data so that we can take that into our strategic planning going forward. So that's the new part of this analysis. The data is imperfect, all data is, but we learned a lot, and we have a lot of next steps that we will take. But again, I think a lot of that becomes some framework that we take into our strategic plan going forward. So with that, I'm going to have Brianne take you through the analysis.
Good morning, Madam President and Commissioners. I'm very excited to be here this morning talking about my favorite subject, economics. Hopefully by the end, you all enjoy economics as much as I do. Yeah. Next slide, please. So why do we do an economic impact? So typically an organization will do an economic impact to better understand its role in the region's economy. Typically, the impacts are measured in terms of jobs, GDP, and tax benefits. Additionally, like Keith mentioned, this year we did a workforce study. And so we did a deep dive into the jobs and industries that these jobs are taking place, the typical pay and benefits for these jobs, as well as doing a wider economic benefits, which is sort of a new, innovative, if economics can be innovative, approach to understanding your benefits. This study is very nerdy. The high-level non-nerdy take is that investments into infrastructure drive regional productivity. And so that's really important when we think about a lot of the reports the State Economist has had lately in terms of net migration into the state and into the region, that it's been a little low. We're not attracting residents. If you're not growing your population very fast, the only way to continue to grow your economy is through productivity gains. And so it's really important that we not only think about how we contribute to jobs, but how we contribute to the overall health of the region. Next slide. So what is our economic impact? So on an annual basis, we contribute about 9.7 billion to GDP, about 100,000 jobs. About 61,000 were in the Portland region. You might be wondering where, roughly the other 30,000 are. We're not able to disaggregate by region the visitor impacts. So we did a slightly different model, and it just makes visitor impacts hard because we don't know exactly where those jobs are located. We know they're visiting the region, so it's likely higher. In terms of tax on an annual basis, $578 million for state and local. So this is going to be the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, and Multnomah County, and then $1.5 billion to federal taxes. So these are sort of the high-level talking points. Next slide. So how did we come up with this number? So we collect a lot of data. We had a really extensive internal data collection process. So we requested all port salary information from HR, spending data involving both the small business team as well as the finance team, badging data, marine statistics. We conduct 2 surveys on PDX. One is an intercept survey. So this is stopping travelers and asking them a few questions. The other is a Wi-Fi survey. As well as the tenant survey and the basis of federal economic data. So what are the reports that will be released next week? So we'll have a high-level overall economic impact report. It will have results by business line. There will be a separate report for PDX. There'll be separate reports for real estate as well as marine. Some additional pieces that we have is this time we have East County specific impacts. And so by doing a true multi-region input output model, we're actually able to disaggregate impacts at a much lower level. We have a workforce and equity report, which will be a first for the port and also pretty novel in terms of economic impacts. That's an add-on that not every organization chooses to do. And that wider economic benefits, which is that technical document that I think is great, that I probably wouldn't recommend to a non-economist. Next slide. So what are the definitions? I think it's really important to just define everything that we're going to see in an economic impact. So we have your direct effect. So these are going to be individuals working at PDX, for an example. So if anyone got coffee this morning, maybe you went to Stuptown on the other side of the terminal, those are going to be direct jobs. The indirect is their supply chain, so wherever they buy their milk, coffee beans from, and then the household income, which is your induced effects, are when those employees go and spend money. And so typically these are going to be things like grocery stores, law firms, rental offices, doctors' offices, sort of all of the things that everyone in this room does to sort of just run their household. Next slide. So this large table, and I apologize, there's going to be a lot of tables. There's just no way to get around that. Highlights all of the different impacts by the business line. So about a third from visitors, a third from business parks, and then a third sort of from PDX-NX, marine, working harbor, and aviation. And in terms of definitions, the working harbor is both the public and private terminals. This is to reflect the navigation and dredging activity that the port does that keeps those companies able to use their facilities. And the just port marine total is 7,850. And so you can sort of see how the state and local impact is split up by property taxes and by, sorry, not property taxes, the various business lines and federal taxes. Next slide. So what are the aviation impacts? So this is going to be all three. So both general aviation airports and PDX. In terms of percent, PDX is 90+% of these numbers. So 10,500 direct jobs, about 1.8 billion contributed to GDP. And sort of why we're using value add as opposed to output is value add is directly related to GDP. So the comparable number. Output includes a lot of intermediary purchases. And so fun fact about GDP, if you don't know, is that it's only includes the final value of goods and services. So think of buying a car, it includes the value of that car, but it doesn't include every purchase that goes into making that car. And so a lot of intermediary spending, B2B, is sort of not included, and that's captured in the output value. Next slide. Visitor impacts. So this is probably the biggest area. The way we determine who's a visitor is in the Intercept survey. We specifically ask an individual, are you visiting the region? A yes response leads to them being captured in our survey. And so how that works is if 25% of all people say yes, we sort of say, okay, 25% of all passengers are traveling or visitors. And so that total number for the year gets input into the economic impact model. And we also ask, length of stay, how much money they spent on hotels, food. Unsurprising, the results showed that hotel is the most expensive outside of spending category. And this is sort of how that activity, what the total economic output of that activity is. And I think just for a comparison, Travel Portland, these numbers are very consistent. And so highly confident that that's an accurate representation. Next slide. So this is the breakdown for the working harbor. Again, quite a few jobs, so both public and private, nearly 13,000, very high value add for this industry. Next slide. Business parks, quite a bit of jobs here. Also compared to the 2015 results, this is up pretty substantially. Between the last report and now, there have been at least 2 major sites developed with very large employment. And so that's sort of why we're seeing the big increase compared to the last time. Next slide. So East County, this is one of the new pieces that I mentioned. like Curtis shared, the focus on building shared prosperity from an economic impact standpoint, the area that we wanted to focus in on is the East County. And so we wanted to understand how we're creating and supporting opportunity in East County. And so these are total as opposed to just direct. And so about 3,000 jobs. A lot of these in the business park will be direct jobs because the port does have industrial properties in East County. And so it's just important for us to begin tracking this moving forward. Next slide. So this is sort of the new workforce who's benefiting portion of the report. This is also my favorite part of the report, but I'll try to keep it quick and not just go on tangents about workforce. So what are the demographic findings? This may be shocking, though probably not. Portland's workforce is predominantly white. It is predominantly male. This is consistent at the port as well. But I wanted to highlight that all of our business lines do have at least one demographic that they're doing better than the regional average. And so that's sort of what we're sharing now is the marine employs more Hispanic. Those workers do get paid better than the regional average for Hispanic workers. Aviation does really well for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Island workers. Business parks are just the most racially diverse overall. But one finding is that we employ a lot more men than we do women across the various business lines. So it's just sort of what we see in the demographics. None of it is really unsurprising given the workforce dynamics of the Portland region. Next slide. So for the next portion of our analysis, we wanted to look at how pay compares to a living wage. There are lots of different salary wage data points that we could use. Part of why we settled on a living wage is this idea of shared prosperity. And so the concept of shared prosperity that we discussed through the strategic plan work is a wage that allows someone to live in the region and do more than just survive. These aren't necessarily thriving wages, but they are a wage that MIT economists think that people would actually survive in the region. And so what does that come out to for the Portland region? For a family of 4, you're looking at about $116,000. There are other living wage calculators estimates that we could have used. There's a self-sufficiency standard, and there's an EPI, which is the Economic Policy Institute estimate as well. We sort of settled in on MIT's. It should be noted that it is the highest of the 3, and so the results will look worse. Because we went with this one over something like the self-sufficiency standard. Again, and that was driven by the focus on shared prosperity, as well as MIT's use of a market-based approach, which is just a fancy way of saying they look at real household spending via credit card data to say what are the bottom 5 to 10% of households actually spending in an area and using that as an estimate. In terms of like why the cost is so high, I do think it's important to note childcare. Housing and taxes are sort of your big 3. In this family of 4, they're only assuming one child needs childcare. And it's already at $18,000 for the one preschool. The other child is assumed to be full-time school. And so that can be much higher if you're dealing with 2 kids that require daycare. So just important things to think about. Next slide. So how does the region perform using the living wage as the comparison? The answer is not well. Fewer women than men earn living wages. There is also very predominant racial patterns in which white workers are more likely to be earning a living wage than workers of other nationalities. Asian workers also perform fairly well, but even for white workers, it's only 64%, so only 2/3. So there are a lot of workers, residents, neighbors who aren't earning enough to meet our definition of a living wage, or the definition that we're using. I also think it's important to share some national studies. So Brookings Institute has done a lot of research into this space. They did a struggling families report in 2021 and found that 47% of families in the region were struggling. This is also very consistent with recent research from the State Economist, who found that 58% of renters are struggling and about 30% of mortgage families are struggling as well. And just a note, the 21 Brookings report, that value, if you add the inflation rate to that to convert it to $23, is like 2 cents different than the MIT living wage that we shared. So it's just sort of confirming that it tends to be a well-received number nationally. Next slide. So we did an analysis based off of occupation. And so this is going to be looking horizontal instead of vertical by industries. And so when you look at occupations in the region, you can see that the vast majority of occupations in the region don't pay a living wage. And then generally, the occupations in port business lines perform a little worse than the regional average. And what are the best performing occupations? Some of the best performing occupations are going to be in the aviation, and then some of the worst performing are going to be in the aviation. Air pilots or aircraft pilots are actually one of the top 5 highest paid jobs in the region. And then as we move forward in the slides, you'll sort of see what might be shocking findings, but a lot of it is being driven by this occupational side, and that there are a lot of people in the worst performing occupations. This is sort of just a national trend. You only have one top executive, and you only have one manager for a team of 10 retail workers. And so you just see more jobs occurring in the worst performing and fewer jobs occurring in the best performing. And then sort of that regional data that we see, there are disproportionate impacts that the worst performing jobs tend to be filled by women, individuals of color, people with less education, and the best performing tend to be filled by white individuals, individuals with higher levels of education, and men. So this is sort of just the context that nationally, a lot of people are struggling to earn enough to keep up with affordability, and that it is definitely so in Portland due to cost of living changes and the recent inflation throughout COVID, and that we're also seeing that at the port. And so next slide. So these are the living wage analysis by industry. And so this is slightly different. The way that this is calculated is that it is the average wage for each gender in each particular industry. If the average wage for women in that industry is below the MIT value, all of the jobs will be in the no. That's just the national standard for how you do this. We had hoped when we started this project that we would have been able to get really high quality responses from the tenants to not be able to use national data. Unsurprising, companies don't want to tell you their pay information, and so we weren't able to do that this time, but we are hoping to be able to do that moving forward. So we did have to rely on the best available federal data, and so this you can kind of see is a little bit more stark than the occupational, because you essentially have everyone either as a yes or a no depending on where the average is. There are some occupations and some industries where even the 90th percentile is going to be below living wage. That's primarily going to be retail. No matter, unless you're like the store manager, you're probably not at that salary. And sort of pretty stark gender dynamics for this business line. But again, this has a lot to do with just the industries and the occupations that people are in. And so, you know, when you walk through any airport, just begin to observe who fills what role, who's the person making your coffee versus the person flying your airplane. And I think flight attendants are also an important call out here, is that the national data says that flight attendants are about 55,000, which due to the recent increase in cost of living, 2 years ago, if I was presenting it, it would have been a job that supports a family of 4. But today, with that 10% year-over-year inflation growth, it's sort of been pushed out. And that's sort of an important regional trend as well, that a lot of jobs that we've historically thought of as really good quality jobs aren't keeping pace with the additional cost of living in the region. Next slide. So this is the working harbor, again, very similar, with women being below. Men in this industry perform really well. So that's really good to see. Next slide. Business parks, men perform slightly worse compared to the marine terminals, but women perform slightly better. And this is also going to be sort of the most diverse in terms of industries that are captured. The business parks include anything from nonprofit. There's a large nonprofit on our business parks, to warehouse and distribution, to advanced manufacturing. And so it's a very varied group of industries. Next slide. So in conclusion, in terms of traditional economic impact, we are an important driver in the region in terms of productivity, jobs, tax, and contribution to GDP. In terms of who benefits, we are subject to the same challenges that the region has, probably more so because we are limited to being in retail, restaurant, and industrial spaces, and there are a lot of challenges in those industries as a whole right now. So, comments, questions?
Thank you so much. And you didn't have to apologize for the nerdiness. I think we were all captivated by it. And I will say up front, I really appreciate going down to this level. We really can't know what we need to do unless we're measuring it. And, an economic analysis to this level that really brings out information in a much more detailed way is really useful to us as we think about how we can move this conversation. But I'm sure there are other questions. So, Commissioner Alexander.
First of all, thank you very much. I mean, this was very insightful, sobering at the same time. I do think that it's going to be very interesting to see how we move from what we influence to what we impact. And I think there's tremendous challenge and opportunity here. And hopefully, as Commission and the Port begin to look at expanding the concentric circles of shared prosperity, we can begin to track. Again, we're not, king or queen makers, but clearly we're in that space and there's a downstream influence. But I am very encouraged by us sort of looking at the places where we're struggling the most and maybe succeeding the least.
Commissioner Koba.
Thank you. I was actually an economics major, and some of this resonates. Did I pick up correctly that the last analysis was done in 2015? Okay. So that's kind of about every 8 years or so.
We're definitely late on this one with COVID.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. And I don't know, you economists all run in the same circle. I'm assuming there might be pockets around the state where performance is better, but I'm assuming there really isn't anywhere else in the state that's doing any better than the Portland region.
In terms of the retail jobs?
Well, just more generally where wages are and living wages and numbers below. And
so I haven't dug super aggressively into the state data. I do know that the state economist, the 58% statistic, he did that analysis. In terms of retail, where I have dug in, it's not great anywhere. And, retail and service jobs nationally, I think, are a big topic for a reason, because almost everywhere they're struggling. I do think that there are certain challenges that the region has. There's, the tax number was the highest for the family. It was higher than housing cost and childcare. And so certainly there are those types of impacts, and housing is a big issue here. So not to say that housing isn't an issue everywhere, but I suspect it's typically worse in your larger cities.
And the final question I would have is, how will this report be used? There's just so much great information here, and I'm thinking, it'd be great to present it to the legislature, but I don't know if you've thought through that.
Yeah, it's a live topic among the executive team right now. There's no question. The conventional use, we've got new data, we'll use that, which is great. But, we do have a strategic plan that gives us really a good frame to dive deeper. I think it gets to where do we have more influence versus control? And I think we're going to take some of these areas where we see pretty blaring disparities and put some strategies behind it. And that'll be done really through the lens of the strategic plan. The other thing I'll just mention, and again, this is a live topic with all of us on the executive team, is the next strategic plan is 2025. Is that right? Yeah. So this really allows us to launch and focus more in the next strategic planning process, and all of us will be very engaged in that.
Commissioner.
I really do appreciate the work and bringing it forward. I wish I was surprised, and I'm not surprised at all from the people that I talk to that are members of the union where I represent folks and other working people in our state and here at the airport and in the area. I think, to me, I look at this and I think, how do we as a commission continue to look at how we pass policies and standards? Because it seems to me one of the only ways that we're going to be able to continue to elevate the standards for workers. I think, I understand you're trying to bring forward factual data to us. I'll add my own viewpoint of it, as I would be curious to look at the profits for a lot of these industries, because it's not just a trend, it's an intentional decision for many very profitable industries to make money off of low-wage women, people of color, and drive down their wage and benefit standards in order to do that. And so that's a piece that to me is also kind of missing here as we look at how could, for instance, the airline industry be able to provide for better jobs across the board for all the workers that are doing work for them. So that's my personal, viewpoint on that, and would be interested in it. I am curious on the data, because you said, it's not surprising that tenants and probably lessees in the business park are reticent to share information about wages. I think it's not just wages. I think it's benefits. How much do those benefits actually cost? Because to offer a health plan, but if it costs thousands of dollars a year, people can't access it. Don't we have the ability as part of our contracts with these companies to require that data is provided to us?
Yes, we do. And that is, I think, another area that is emerging is how do we affect the commercial market that we can, again, have more control over, and we certainly can control our contracting. It's balanced against a willingness of the industry to engage at that level, and that's an emerging area. It's surprising that we got as much as we did informationally out of the surveys that we did with our tenants. It's even been surprising to me that in the latest, some of the deal making that we've been doing in my group, like out in Gresham Vista, that we're moving as far as we've moved contractually around some of our shared prosperity objectives, but sharing wage data and other parts of the benefits package is viewed as, something that is in the domain of the company and is a competitive disadvantage if it gets out publicly. So we'd have to figure out, how do you protect that information? And that's hard as a public organization, because most of what we do is discoverable through public information requests. That's going to be a challenge for us as we go forward, but it does feel like the industries that we're engaged in are starting to move in this direction.
Keith, will you just speak to the Gresham Vista 5? And one of the ways we're trying to get at this is include some options for the lessee or the purchaser to comply essentially with the contractual obligation that might include some of those items and not others, where they get to decide how they're going to meet our jobs criteria. And we've had trouble with other purchasers in the past about sharing data that we really needed, and have been sort of frustrated by that. But we are trying to learn as we go, maybe just what the jobs criteria look like at Gresham Vista 5, just so commissioners get a sense of what we're doing. Contracts look different than they looked even 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it's a good one, because we engaged in it. Some of you will remember there was a master development agreement with Colas Construction Spec Development. And within that master development agreement, they essentially got an option to buy the property if it meets certain criteria, including quality jobs criteria, and we defined it a little bit different than the MIT, but it wasn't too far away. What was the?
Yeah, so a living wage is different than a quality job. There is no ability to measure quality job in terms of data sets. Quality jobs are more comprehensive. One of the factors they include is some sort of wage threshold. Historically, the Ports criteria has been at least median pay for the state. We have sort of looked at, should we up that to a living wage threshold? They're very similar. It's like a $500 difference between the two. So marginal impact, but the port quality job frameworks includes things like healthcare, time off, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sort of community impact. And so it's a lot more comprehensive than the living wage number. Just from a research standpoint, there isn't a unified data set that I can go and say, we have 1,000 quality jobs or 50,000 quality jobs from our economic impact. There is actually a federal effort to begin collecting that data, though.
Just to maybe finish the Lot 5 story, it was an example where we were able to engage in pretty clear criteria that had to be met in order for the deal to go through. And we just broke ground. If you go out there today, it's amazing. This is the last 50-acre site in the entire metro region. It will be 150 quality jobs that met our metrics, and lots of really good benefits to the community around workforce training and outreach with the user and work with the local service providers. So it's a good example where we're using kind of our commercial heft and the fact that we own the land to be pretty choosy in the way that we're doing the transaction to make sure it provides the benefits that we're looking for. And I think more of that is what we'll be endeavoring to do.
Thank you. I'll call on Commissioner Devon.
Thank you, Brianne, for that in-depth analysis. And I too geeked out on it, so no need to apologize. A couple things. I think one of my takeaways is that we operate in a difficult region, and we have a unique set of businesses here at the port. Right, when you break out our business lines, and those two things together paint the picture that you painted for us. I wonder if it makes sense also to think about peer groups, right? I mean, because of our unique set of businesses, we're unlikely to find other businesses like us in the region, right? To look at it holistically. But perhaps if we thought about our 4 business lines separately, should we be tracking peer groups to see how we are doing against? Of course, we have internal metrics, right? We want to do well for ourselves, but it would be interesting just to see peer groups alongside for each of those businesses, if that makes sense.
Certainly, we could do a comparison of those industries in peer markets. And so, we could look at Seattle, SeaTac as a comparison, also their marine terminals, their industries. And so that's something we could do.
Yeah, and other port authorities do again, the workforce part of this is probably new from what is typical, but most of the port authorities up and down the West Coast, I think we can be comparing our economic impact study with what they're doing.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I really appreciate the time and the energy that went into it. Again, I think it's important for us to have this kind of data so we can know as we plan strategically how we're moving the needle to make the change that I think all recognize needs to be made here. Did you? I think we have a public comment.
Several hundred, close to 1,000 members. And I had a question, Senator. Thank you. One was in your MIT framework. Does it account, I believe, booming catastrophe for his retirement savings? any revolving consumer debt that a family might have?
No, no debt payments outside of a mortgage, so it has to be.
All right. So I would be remiss if I didn't suggest to the board that the Teamsters have a tried and true method for helping you resolve many of the issues that you've seen here today. And we are more than happy to have that conversation with any one of you. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. We'll move on with the agenda. We have a consent item, which is readoption of the commission policy number 6.1.2 investments. Does any commissioner wish for a presentation on the consent item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for motion and second for approval of the executive director's recommendation to approve the policy.
So move.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Our first action item, I'll call Stan Waters to introduce.
Morning, Commissioners. The Port of Portland Navigation Dredge Oregon workers are represented by the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 701. Earlier this year, we established some ground rules and began bargaining for a successor agreement to our contract with them that expired at the end of June. This agenda item is requesting your approval for a new negotiated 4-year contract between the port and the union, which they ratified September 1st. And here with me today is Blaise Lamphere, our port's labor relations manager, who will present the agenda item.
Thank you, Stan. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Very pleased to be here today to speak to our new agreement, our collective bargaining agreement, a successor agreement to the one, as Stan mentioned, that expired in June with IUOE 701. Next slide, please. So the highlights of this agreement, I will just note that both of the CBAs that I will be presenting on today, we came in within the authorized parameters, economic parameters for those contracts. Highlights here on wages is a 6% retroactive to the July 6th date, corresponds to they're on a weekly payroll, this particular union, and it is the first full pay period of the month of July. And so the dates that you see in July for each of the 4 years, that is what it's tied to, the start of the first full pay period of the month. 5% in year 2, and in years 3 and 4, ranges of 2 minimum to 5 max on the CPIW West Size Class A cities second half, which is reported in January of each year. That particular index has served us well, and every contract has reference to it. Beyond wages, the introductory period, we have agreed to change in this contract to increase from 75 to 120 calendar days. And the major motivator is for that, there's additional paid leave available to these individuals, under state law, et cetera. We need to ensure that we have enough time to look at these employees and really understand, their ability to perform these different tasks under this agreement. So we have a longer introductory period. Next slide, please. Highlights on overtime. In the past, all overtime on Sundays was 2 times the rate. It was a double time. It is a day that typically the major operations of the dredge are down. However, some work can be performed. There's generally only 6 employees during a 24-hour period. that are on, each on the 3 shifts of 8. There's 2 on. One of the exceptions was when they were on watch, they were being paid at time and a half. This changes that. It is double time for all Sunday work at this time. Time worked on holidays is increased from double time to 2.5. And I'd like to explain that, why we went to 2.5. One federal contract actually was double time plus 8 hours of pay, which was effectively 3 times. We weren't ready to go to 3 times. We went to 2.5. The equivalent in many of our other contracts here at the port is when you work a holiday, you receive 1.5 times pay. So overtime plus 8 hours of pay for the holiday. So it actually effectively works out to 2.5. There is not a bank here. This is pay, straight pay. There's no separate bank for that holiday time. Holidays that we added this year, which aligns now with admin, the administrators of this group. We added Juneteenth and we added Veterans Day. We deleted President's Day, so it's a net gain of 1 holiday under this contract. The sick leave bank limitation that this group has, we are increasing that. It is later in the contract, but we're increasing that limit from 56 hours to 72 hours, effective that first pay period in the year July of 2026. Next slide, please. Travel subsistence article in this contract. This is a relatively routine. These rates tend to go up every year under the IRS. So those zone rates of pay and compensation for travel will be adjusted. One of the things we did unique to this contract for those who hold a commercial driver's license, we have probably 80 to 100 hours estimated a fiscal year where we could use someone who has a CDL. None of the jobs, however, are required to have a commercial driver's license, that we do have some employees that do have one. So the idea came up, they should get additional compensation if they are assigned to CDL work for the day. And so we did create this additional 2 hour per hour premium for any hours worked in the assignment. On that, they would also get their travel pay, their customary travel pay, regardless of where they were performing that work. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a breakout by estimated financial impact of new dollars for each year versus the base year, and the anticipated total increase in new money over the life of the CBA, $3,679,901. Next slide, please. And the executive director's recommendation is for an approval to enter into this 4-year collective bargaining agreement with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 701. Any questions?
Thank you, Commissioner Nemi. No? Okay. Any questions, concerns? Okay. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries, and I believe you have another one for us, please.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning again. Unfortunately, you're going to be seeing me up here for the next few items. So we will try to move quickly through this one. So marine landscaping, I know you all have toured our sites, but one of the things that we're most proud of is the landscape. And it's because this crew does all of that work, Rivergate, Swan Island, even out here at the airport, different group, but we take a lot of pride in the look and feel of our marine industrial areas that we have around Portland. And if you just look at other industrial areas up and down the coast, you'll see something very different. So this is an important group to us, and I'll reintroduce Blaze to really quickly work through this agenda item.
Thank you. Yes, next slide, please, for this contract. I want to highlight the terms of this agreement, and actually in the body of the item want to point out that one of the things we're doing with this group, we're very mindful of economic internal equity historically. It's something I've looked at for many years, long before the Equal Pay Act. We were looking at that, and one of the things we're mindful of is we have landscape gardeners on the PDX maintenance side. They are required to have CDLs, and those on the marine side are not. However, nonetheless, there is a historical relationship between pay that we look at it as to what that gap is across our internal industries. And so we're mindful of that and address that in this particular contract. And I want to mention that prior to the implementation of the wages for July 23, which are retroactive, we are doing an internal equity adjustment of $1.50 per hour for these employees, these classifications, to maintain historically where we have been internally between the two groups. So I wanted to note that. And then we pick up right with the application of wages in the first year, a 6% retroactive increase. Again, in this case, these are their payrolls biweekly, and it's tied again, like the previous contract, to the the date of the first full pay period in the months of July. 5% in the second year, and years 3 and 4 are 1 to 5% based on CPIW West size Class A cities second half. The lead, we changed the premium, how it's calculated for the lead. We had sort of a cumbersome formula previously of 10% plus 50%, 50 cents per hour over the highest classification supervised. We changed it to a simple 12.5% here, and that mirrors what the lead has in the PDX maintenance contract. Next slide, please. The probationary period is changed from 6 months to 1,040 actual hours worked. That is actually consistent with some of our other contracts and makes more sense to us to ensure that we get to observe an individual's performance in these jobs. Health and welfare. This particular group has been on the Union Trust since they came over to the port back in the late 70s. And, you know, they occasionally have voted on this. And frequently over the years, it was a tie vote and it didn't move forward. They have voted this time to go to the port's healthcare, and that is going to be occurring in effective January 26. Their open enrollment is fall of 2025, and they will segue over to the port plans and have all the benefits of those plans that, you know, people that have coverage, employees that get coverage through the port. We are also establishing a safety incentive, which is comparable to the one under PDX maintenance. This is an exciting time to look at this. $500 payment to all regular full-time employees for each fiscal year that marine landscape meets its safety metric. Fiscal year 23-24 is the first fiscal year during which it will be measured for eligibility for the first possible payout is in fall of 24. So that has to be created analogous to what we have, as I say, at PDX maintenance. Next slide. Holidays, like the previous group, Juneteenth and Veterans Day are added, and President's Day has been deleted. Again, that's a consistency with port admin. Bereavement had language in it about a travel requirement to get up to 5 days of bereavement. That has been eliminated in some of the contracts, and we did that here too. We didn't feel that that was appropriate to continue to have that restriction in there to get up to 5 days on bereavements. You also have the safety shoe change here. Again, that makes it more consistent with the PDX maintenance side. Next slide. Okay, here you have the estimated financial impact. Total increase in new money over the life of the CBA is $293,879. Next slide, please. Executive Director recommendation is approval to enter into 4-year collective bargaining agreement with Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 483.
Thank you. And am I remembering correctly? This is a unit of 4 or so.
It is 4
Thank you. I
employees.
was just trying to figure out the cost there. Any other questions or comments on this item?
Just a quick clarification. In the operating engineers target adjustments for year 25, there was a range of 2.5 to 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed here it was 1 to 5%. Is there a reason? And it was based off of the same CDI West data.
It was 1 to 5 that we had on the table with both groups, and this group voted in the 1 to 5. That's so I proposed it that way to both groups, and the different groups had different priorities. So that's the only reason. I mean, ultimately, it's costed the same way as potential impact.
Well, the ceiling is the same. I just wanted to make some idea around why the floor was different. Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a motion to approve it.
So move.
Thank you. We have a motion and second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Yes, so I will, while Dwight is walking up, I'll just give a little bit of context here. Again, back to kind of the structure of the new Trade and Economic Development division. We are parking a lot of the general fund components within that division, and Lower Willamette is a big part of that. So, you know, we want to look at our Lower Willamette program really in the context of all of the rest of the general fund. It's a great opportunity for us to be planning together. And some of these areas are ripe for leaning in and taking more action. And this is one of those great opportunities. Willamette Cove, you'll see on the pictures, is really a gem. It can be a gem for the community. It needs to be cleaned up. There's the Port Metro and the city are the primary parties that are involved in the cleanup. And you'll see Dwight is right in the middle of design work. This is to allow a scope change and a contract change to complete the design work, which represents a lot of the complexity in dealing with Superfund sites. And I'm hopeful that you'll hear more from us in the future around sites like this, that we really do have kind of a pathway towards cleanup and that we start making that kind of progress. The Superfund process itself can be very difficult, even if you're trying to accelerate towards cleanup. But this is one of those opportunity sites for us to move forward. So with that, have Dwight present the item.
Great, thanks, Keith. Next slide. So good morning. This action item is requesting approval of the amendment to an existing personal service contract. The contract is to GSI Water Solutions to do this remedial design service for the Willamette Cove project area as part of the Portland Harbor Superfund site. So this action would add $3.5 million to this existing contract and would result in a new contract cap of $11.5 million. This action, this work is being done under an administrative order on consent that the Port and our project partners signed with EPA in August of 2019. We're working with the, as Keith said, the City of Portland, the State of Oregon, U.S. governments, and the Port, and each of our three parties are paying an equal 25% share of the cost of this work. Next slide. So the Willamette Cove in-water project area is located about in the middle of the Portland Harbor Superfund site. It's shown in this picture as the Cove area on the left side of the picture. It's just downstream of the Burlington Northern Railroad Bridge. It's about 5 miles from downtown Portland. The upland site is about 24 acres. It's currently now vacant with sparse vegetation. Metro acquired this property in 1996, and they acquired it with the intent of turning it into an open space natural area. The port's historical connection to this site began in 1903 when we began developing a common use ship repair yard. That common use ship repair supported the World War I and World War II, as well as the Korean War, and it allowed any ship repair operator to repair ships at that particular site. The other industries associated with the upland area included a lumber and plywood mill. There was a cooperage plant at one portion of the site where they made wooden barrels. The McCormick and Baxter Superfund site is just immediately upriver from the site. And there were other minor industries associated, mostly associated with the lumber industry. The port understood that without public agency leadership with our project partners, all who have a connection to this site would not be cleaned up. So that is the primary reason why we're doing this work. We recognize that we needed this leadership in order to move this project forward in a timely manner. Next slide. So the contract scope again is for completing the remedial design services for this site. It involves all of the investigations needed to define the nature and extent of the contamination and how best to go about cleaning up this project, this project area. I want to emphasize that this is just for the remedial design portion of the cleanup. The actual construction of this remedy would come later. Next slide. So the original contract was awarded after a public request for proposal process. GSI Water Solutions was the preferred contractor. The commission approved that award in October of 2019. We are now 4 years into this remedial design process. We expect to complete this work by the end of calendar year 2024. Next slide. So the original personal service contract was awarded, had a cap of $6.5 million. In March of 2023, we added another $1.5 million to that contract just to keep things moving forward. This particular action will add another $3.5 million to that contract. The total project costs include agency oversight costs. We pay for EPA, the lead agency, to oversee this work. We also pay the costs of DEQ and our tribal governments to oversee this work. As part of our agreement with our project partners, each of the project partners are responsible for their own internal staff costs. So that's shown as NA. So the total budget for this project has now increased to just over $14.3 million. So when we originally awarded this contract, the estimated total project costs were approximately $8.1 million. So we're looking at approximately a $6 million increase, over the 4 years we've been working this project. The primary reason for this cost increase is labor and service cost increases, agency oversight costs have increased, but the primary reason is just additional requirements that were being placed on the investigations that we're conducting. We have had a substantial increase in sampling effort and associated costs with those analytical laboratory costs. Those additional sampling costs and
I was just noting, I feel exactly the same way.
I can relate.
And those unaccounted for requirements that we now recognize account for about $4 million of that increase. So the port's obligation in the total cost of this project, including the port internal staff costs, are just under $4 million, as you see there. This comes out of, as Keith said, the Port General Fund. We budget this annually through our approved budgets. One other thing I would add here too is when the contract was originally established, we established the contractor GSI Water Solutions worked with our Port Small Business Enterprise Program, and we set a lofty goal of 26% of having small business enterprise firms participate in this work. GSI Water Solutions is currently running about just over 20%. We hope to improve upon that goal before the end of this contract. But again, small business enterprise firms are firms that are certified by the Oregon or Washington as either minority, women, or veteran-owned firms, or as an emerging small business. So really what this means is anywhere from 20 to 26% of this work is being done by local small business enterprise firms. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Finally, before Commission takes action on this amendment, we would like to emphasize just how important the site is and what we have accomplished to date. The Willamette Cove project area, in-water project area, is one of 17 project areas in the Portland Harbor Superfund site that is going through this remedial design phase. To date, the Willamette Cove project has submitted 5 of the 8 major deliverables to EPA. By the end of this calendar year, we hope to submit the 30% remedial design package, which will be a major milestone for our project. Again, we're hoping to complete 100% remedial design by the end of 2024. That would make this Willamette Cove project one of the first project areas in Portland Harbor completing remedial design. This really is a unique opportunity to clean up legacy contamination and significantly enhance the habitat at this key site in Portland Harbor. The St. John's and Cathedral Park neighborhoods sit at this site, adjacent to this site. These neighborhoods have been historically disproportionately affected by this contamination and the work that will need to be done to clean it up. There's a tremendous amount of community interest in this site. The Willamette Cove group actively works with EPA as part of the Portland Harbor Coalition group. We provide regular updates to the community. We engage the community in the work that we're doing. And this this picture is from a Willamette Cove Environmental Field Day. We just had one this last Saturday. This was pictures from our first environmental field day. It was at a park that overlooks the Willamette Cove site. The field day is a free public event to people of all ages, basically to learn about the science of environmental cleanup and really to understand Willamette Cove's past, present, and future. It was a glorious day last Saturday. The community came out in droves. We had a great time. Next slide. So finally, the staff requests approval of this recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I will say first, thank you so much for all the work and the involvement of the community. I think that's really important for the factors that you listed in terms of burden on the community in particular. I will also say, you know, I always appreciate hearing the history of these sites, right? The port did not was not the sole beneficiary of the activities there. Frankly, they were shared across the community in terms of the war effort issues in particular. But knowing that we were first and that we didn't continue to wait to act here is really important. And I appreciate the leadership as we continue to do that. So, Commissioner Luther.
Thank you. And I do want to just add, I'm really excited to see this move forward. This is incredibly complex, and that is an understatement. So, you know, again, commend the port for being a leader in the space and moving things forward, because it's been a long road. I do, however, just wonder, and if you could share with me a little bit about, you know, the escalation of costs, and given that this is just the beginning and that the Superfund site, we're in this for the long haul, there is a lot, and from a financial stability perspective, this is a huge exposure for us as an entity. And so could you talk to us a little bit about who is in charge with negotiating with GSI, and how are we thinking about protections within the contract from escalating cost and potentially even some shared risks around ensuring that we don't have incentives to just, you know, waddle along, so that we aren't just a price taker, but rather we have shared responsibility with the vendors, because I am worried. You know, we've been talking about increasing costs across a lot of things. We know that that's real in a lot of spaces. At the same time, this is an area where there's a tremendous amount of incentive to sort of slow walk things and continue the coffers paying. I'm just worried about the long-term viability of this organization to be able to withstand that. So anyway, if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so again, the GSI contract was let after a public request for proposal process. So there were multiple vendors that applied to do this work. GSI was identified as the preferred vendor, and we awarded the contract to them. So,
sorry, could you just clarify who was negotiating? Was it to Port, or was it a coalition of individuals? Or?
Yes, so the Port is the contract administrator. That was one of the agreements we had with our project partners in shared responsibilities. The Port, being the contract administrator, worked through the contract awarding and pays the invoices basically for GSI as work proceeds. As far as you know, insurances from the vendor on providing you know, deliverables or services at fixed price, it was never a fixed price contract. This work changes, it changes constantly. A lot of the uncertainty that was associated with the original cost estimate was because there wasn't a lot of clarity from EPA on what the requirements would be to do some of this work. And so over the last 2 years, we have gotten more clarity. EPA has come out with guidance documents on how we do this work. So I would say a lot of the cost increases were just associated with the unaccounted for sampling effort that needed to be done in order to complete this work. Again, we had 2 major field sampling efforts the last 2 years. As you add sample density and those associated analytical costs to do that work, costs go up. And that was a large component of these cost increases. Had nothing to do with the work GSI is doing.
Yeah, your point about the exposure is what we're living with and grappling with, and it's very real.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for motion and second to approve the amendment. Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you very much for the presentation. Keith, I think you have our next one.
I do. All right, this is a very interesting one, moving just upriver from the prior from Willamette Cove up to Terminal 2, and I'm going to tie these 2 things together. Not only are they both frankly competing within the same fund for being able to move forward, this is a unique, I'll call it a workaround around base zoning in the Portland Harbor. And what I love about what we're trying to do at Terminal 2, and Ken will give you a good full update, is that we're taking a harbor brownfield and we are trying to turn it into a very active area that the public has access to equitable job creation, housing options, the whole vision that we have at Terminal 2. And we're really trying to detach ourselves from a history that is somewhat obsolete. And so being a marine terminal, a general cargo marine terminal, is pretty obsolete. That's why we have moved in this direction of creating a much broader master planned industrial area. It sits in the heart of it's the upper part of the Portland Harbor Superfund area, but it's in it. And what we learned from how to develop this site, you can start applying that down the harbor to a lot of other brownfields that are kind of locked in their past, whether it's through environmental issues or whether it's through zoning, and having more flexible industrial zoning is key. And we will be kind of leaning in and advocating for changes to the zoning code as it relates to this property and like properties in the harbor. But for now, we have to do kind of a bit of a workaround with Prosper Portland. Ken and the team have done a great job. It turns out that Prosper Commission is meeting today, and Ken's hopefully going to leave here with your yes vote and go to Prosper Portland in front of their commission and testify as well. So with that, I'll have Ken describe the item.
All right. Before I get started, and good morning, commissioners. Just wanted to thank Prosper Portland, BDS, and BPS, City of Portland, because they've been big partners in helping us bring T2 online and transform it from an old marine terminal into a housing innovation campus. And so without their help, would be a lot more difficult. Next slide, please. All right, we've done, since about 2018, we've done a fair amount of planning, of analysis. How do you turn an old marine terminal into a housing campus for other alternative uses? And we really landed on a concept in 2021 through now. And in 2022, when we won the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenge, that really accelerated our planning and speed to get us up and running. We've hosted the Hacienda prototypes, housing prototypes that were funded by the state legislature. We've started and finished our master planning of the site. And in February, you approved our first long-term lease of Modami who is a missing middle housing manufacturer, a modular, and they're currently under construction and should be shipping out units in the first quarter of next year. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder of the property we're working with, it's roughly about 40 acres. What we're trying to do here is attract housing manufacturing facilities, those folks that will either develop new or take our existing buildings and rehab them like Modami. University of Oregon will be building their acoustics research lab, so we'll have research and development capacity. We'll have demonstration space for a variety of different housing prototypes, because with innovation, you need prototyping. And we need to have incubator space for small scale companies that are related to housing. And then we need to feed folks, so we need to support a retail space on campus. Next slide, please. And this is a rendering we recently completed of the site. And this is hopefully what we achieve. It's a active campus. It has a multitude of buildings. It has places to eat and congregate. And there's a variety of companies at different scales and research capabilities with our university system. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of Modami. Like I mentioned, they're currently under construction. Right now, you can start to see what T2 might become in the future with Modami's project. And as I mentioned, we're hoping to see some prototypes rolling out of there next quarter. And in order to get that, we got to do a lot of work. And we've been doing a lot of work. And we have to, when we look at these really critical, complex sites, we have to evaluate site constraints, site strengths. We get feedback from the industry, potential customers. We got to look at things like, zoning. We got to create development standards that will guide how development takes place and the look and feel of the campus. And then we got to create, since this will be a lease only, not fee simple sell campus, we have to create common area maintenance areas where we can recoup our costs as we keep some common area circulation space and other spaces. Next slide, please. And one of the constraints Keith mentioned was the zoning. This site's been dedicated to marine operations, and so the zoning there's a zoning overlay that makes the site river dependent. The use is required to be river dependent, river related. In order to, reach our vision, we have to create 2 lots. So on this slide here, you see lot 1, lot 2, a water side lot that will keep our U.S. Corps of Engineer dredge base as well as ship storage operation going on. And then a second parcel labeled lot 2 that's inland, just detached from the river, and really is the housing innovation campus. And just an oddity of zoning, they require, if you have 2 owners of the same lots next to each other, the city of Portland considers that a site and applies the most restrictive zoning. So you have to create a different ownership structure, and that's what this agreement does. This tenants in common agreement does, and Prosper Portland's been they've been really helping us on this in being our co-owners at T2. Next slide. So what is a tenants in common agreement? Essentially, it's just an ownership structure. And what we do is we change the deed that will have Prosper Portland as 1% owners, the Port 99% owners. The Port will retain all revenues, all costs associated with development. In Prosper Portland, will this be partners in economic development of helping us market the site, because it does really help the city in terms of creating jobs and prosperity for the region. Part of that is any EDA grants we have, they have to sign on to, and they're going to purchase their 1% for $1. Next slide. And with that, I'm asking for your permission for the written recommendation item that was included in your packet. Any questions?
Thank you. I like the innovative approach here. Commissioner Alexander, did you have something?
No, Godspeed.
Thank you. So I don't know if that's a motion, but it sounded like one. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you so
Thank you
much
very
for the
much.
work. I think we have Dan Pippinger next.
Yeah. Good morning, commissioners. Happy to see Keith up here more than me. That was great. Today, I'm here to present two interrelated items. The first is a request to modify the business terms of the Loyal Legion lease, which you approved in April at commission. After the lease approval, funding challenges related to the pre-security location and size of the restaurant became apparent. And in response, we're proposing an alternative approach, like the one we're using for the pop-up retail to support emerging business, which not only will address our immediate challenge, but also give us the opportunity to maybe use this approach for other concessions in the future. The second item is to request an amendment to the public improvement contract for Hoffman Skanska, established for the Terminal Core project, both for some TSA equipment, but also to execute the build out of the Loyal Legion space. So we'll just go sequentially and maybe stop after each item to answer questions. The first item will be presented by Caitlin Hunter, the Senior Manager of Concessions and Customer Experience.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, commissioners. Morning still, yes, barely, but we're still there. So thanks for having me today. I am here to discuss, as Dan mentioned, the Loyal Legion lease changes. And I thought we'd just quickly go over a quick reminder of the mezzanine restaurant space. You can see a rendering above you of just how predominant this location is in TCOR. It's really the anchor for this whole Oregon market space. We have 6 other concessionaires going into this area, and it's really vital that we get a critical mass of concessions in this central mezzanine space. As Dan mentioned, this is a very large footprint for a restaurant. At almost 7,800 square feet, it's over double the size of our standard concession spaces for food and beverage full service. Most of our spaces are between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet. So with that really large footprint comes a really large build out cost. So our build out cost has been estimated at $8.5 million to build this space. And that is a large amount of money that has never been invested in the airport before by a concessions tenant. So this is really a very unique space. And I think that we just we need to remember the expense for the tenants and how much that $8.5 million really is an outlay for our concessions tenants. Next slide, please. So I think I've gone over a few of these points already, but a couple of items I'll mention. Prior to TCOR, we had 2 full-service pre-security restaurants. These 2 restaurants combined had an average sales of approximately $6 million a year. So we do see the value in having a full-service pre-security restaurant. Not only is it important for sales, it's also important for our community to have a meeting space, for our tenants to have a meeting space, for our staff to have a place to eat lunch and get, meals that are really at a good price point for them. So the port and our consultants estimate an annual sales of around $5 million a year at this location. And this is, coming from the historical data that we've seen in these locations, although the space is different than our previous restaurants. The previous restaurants were on the path of travel. They were on the in-planing level right before the security checkpoints. And this mezzanine space is off the path of travel. So it does come with some complications. The sales are also unproven. While we forecast $5 million annual sales, those are yet to be seen. And that's really risky for outside private investment. So as Dan mentioned, unfortunately, after approval in April, our Loyal Legion was not able to secure private investment for this space due to those reasons we mentioned. Also noteworthy is that the industry as a whole, I'm sure you've all flown and understand that people want to get through security. The pre-security programs in a lot of airports around the US are not thriving at this point in time. We do feel like our program here is different. We have good a proven track record of sales pre-security. We have a really good program. People come to the airport to shop and dine, and we think that this is unique to other airports within the industry. So we still feel strongly that the sales will be there for this location, but the industry trend is away from pre-security locations. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd just give you a quick refresher on the concept of what Loyal Legion is and who they are. They have 2 locations here in Portland and 1 in Northern California. And they are just a great fit for this location at the airport. This large pre-security location really needs to have a broad appeal for lots of different segments of customers. And Loyal Legion has put together a great design where they can actually hit a lot of different passenger demographics. So I'll ask the next slide, please, real quick. And actually one more, please. Come back to this slide. So just as an example of that, you can see here the layout of the space and what's being proposed. The balcony bar will have 96 taps at this point, which is, you can get all of your local beers that you would like on tap there. Also a kids play area, some theater seating for sports viewing, those kind of things. And then a speakeasy, which is a space that's more feminine as opposed to a standard beer hall. Back a slide, please. Great. So in addition to broad appeal, like I mentioned, we need that anchor tenant to really drive that Oregon market space. This is a proven brand, local as well. And Chef's Table, who will be operating this location, has also been awarded 3 additional spaces in the RFP. Cure, Grassa, and Pilot House Distilling are all a part of their company, and they would be able to gain some efficiency by operating those locations at the airport here as well. Like I mentioned, it's a reasonable price point and a gathering space. And one other item I'll mention is that approximately 25% of their vendors or their sales purchases from vendors are minority-owned businesses. So Dos Hermanos is a local bakery, local minority-owned bakery, and they provide all of the bread for the Loyal Legion locations, as well as their produce and fruit producers are also minority-owned businesses. Next slide, please. And one more, please. Okay, so the variations from the standard concessions model. So in a traditional model, the tenant would pay for the entire build out. In what we're proposing here, the port would pay for the design and construction of the restaurant at approximately $8.5 million. This is something, like we mentioned, that we haven't done in the past, and Dan has mentioned that maybe we could look at doing this potentially in the future. But this is for a very unique space for all the reasons I've already mentioned. So be paid out of the port cost center. Loyal Legion would still be responsible for all the startup costs associated with getting the business up and running, inventory, small whalers, those kinds of things. The port would also be responsible to do a midterm refurbishment halfway through the lease. That is at the discretion of the port. It's generally about 10% of the value of the build out initially. And that is, like I mentioned, at the port's discretion if the refurbishment is needed. And that is built into the financial model currently at 10%. The Loyal Legion would be operating this location like any of our other concessions locations. So they would manage and operate the facility on a day-to-day basis. They would be responsible for staffing. They would be responsible for all of the day-to-day items. When a blender breaks, they would be responsible to replace that and put that into their operating expenses. So we envision this on a day-to-day basis, operating just like any of our other concessions locations. They would collect all the revenue and pay all the expenses. As a part of those expenses, the Loyal Legion would receive a 5% operator fee, and the port will receive 5% for rent. After those expenses, the debt service will be paid back as a percentage of the revenue. So 90% initially for the port to pay back that debt service. And then once the debt service is paid off, it would shift to an 80-20 split. And the port cost center would be refunded for that $8.5 million. And then after that gets paid off, the profit would go to the airline cost center. Next slide, please. So we're proposing here the business terms to be changed will be a 12-year lease instead of the typical 10-year lease for food and beverage, with 3 additional 1-year options to extend at the port's discretion. We've extended the term here because the payback at the 5 million in annual sales is about 8 years. So, if we don't hit those $5 million sales marks, we want to have some buffer in there to ensure that we can get paid back for the full extent of the $8.5 million. The financial structure, as I mentioned, the 5% operator fee and 5% rent, and then the rest of the revenue would go toward the split, as mentioned on the last slide. Maintenance, like I mentioned, would be on Loyal Legion. Anything other than the $5,000 or over a $5,000 mark would need to be approved by the port, and all the other business terms will stay consistent with a standard concessions lease. Next slide, please. So here's where we are today, October of 23, and we need to get going on this build out in order to be open by that May deadline. So we have already progressed to 90% design of this facility, and that actually went in for city permitting a couple days ago, so that's exciting. But we need the entire next few months in order to get this constructed in time to be open. Next slide, please. With that, the executive director recommendation is to modify the terms of the Loyal Legion lease for the mezzanine restaurant space at PDX.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Commissioner Nemi.
I understand the situation that we're in and the modifications being requested to this lease. I just would like to say in the future, if this is an option that's available to other businesses, especially Black-owned, woman-owned, minority-owned businesses, I'd like to have that stated up front.
Thank you. Anyone else? I had a question. It's a unique space. I wonder, did we consider breaking up the space into smaller increments so that we might have 2 smaller restaurants that could raise the funds?
Great question. Yes, we did consider that. The majority of the build out costs are really associated with the utilities that run to the space. We also only have 1 kitchen space there. So we could have potentially divided it up, but the cost is really in that infrastructure. So it didn't seem like a viable option to break that up.
Thank you. Commissioner Alexander?
Yeah, I did want to amplify Commissioner Nemi's consideration, and also to look to see if when we find ourselves in these types of arrangements that our partner is one who is chosen because they are strong supporters, proponents, advocates of our shared prosperity initiative, so that there's a way for us to sort of have 1 and 1 equal 3. Again, I think there are probably partners for whom the lack of that would make them a non-starter. So I hope that we will factor that in.
Thank you, Commissioner Lamb.
I just want to say I understand this is being creative because of the sort of situations, but I like to understand the partnership in this unique contract in terms of reviewing, ongoing reviewing the expenses and making sure that our performing tasks hope to. So do we have that flexibilities in obtaining that kind of ongoing conversation?
Yes, we will be writing or constructing the lease in a way that allows the port to have that continued involvement with the oversight.
Thank you.
Commissioner Luther, go ahead.
During our earlier discussions, we talked a little bit about the trade-offs of some of the requirements that we have as a port for vendors playing a part in the difficulty in getting some of the financing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, as a result of this process, one, I do believe in the local and all of those things, but as a result of that, in terms of ability for the vendors to get financing on their own, have there been any discussions about reevaluating that to a degree so that we don't find ourselves in a position of having to fund or at least, backing into in this situation in the past? Or are we sort of steadfast in that, knowing that that's a contribution towards difficulties in getting financing?
Yeah, great question. And I think there is lessons to be learned from this discussion and this unique deal. We have contemplated how we can do this better in the future. What we come up against is by requiring proposers to submit all of their financing in the RFP process, you're potentially eliminating some small businesses that might be able to not get that up front. It just adds an additional barrier that adds some complication. But I don't think that means that we shouldn't look into it in the future. And I think we will be reevaluating how that might work for future RFPs.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Thank you. We have a motion and second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Before I introduce George, I just wanted to acknowledge the comments by Commissioner Nimi and Alexander. I know it was good part of our conversation yesterday about how we leverage the power of the port to meet our shared prosperity goals, and it's not lost on us. So thank you for your conversation yesterday and today. We take it seriously, and we will be thinking. There's a lot of stress on the concessions program in terms of cost for build out. And we do need to be more creative and thoughtful about how we're getting people in. I think the team's done a really good job at lowering barriers to entry, but we have new barriers popping up in front of us, and we can't just rely on some of the old methods we've used. And redoing the RFP, which I think you all saw earlier, we've done great work, but it's not over. And these new barriers are coming at us, and here's one right in front of us that we just tripped on. I think this is a good solution. It's the right one for what we've got, but it's a path we're on for sure. So the second item will be presented by George Seaman, the project manager for the Terminal Core project.
Hey, thank you, Dan. So next slide. So today we're asking for an amendment to the Hoffman Skanska. One more, please. The contract really to serve two purposes. The first, for about $2.2 million for the purchase of some TSA approved security lane equipment, and then about almost $8 million for the implementation of the Loyal Legion fit up. Next slide. So I'll kind of go through some of the TCOR strategies. I know it's running late. We'll try to go as quick as we can here. Overall, what's going on out there, there's just a lot of work going on. We've got 900 craft workers. At this point in time, over the last month, a significant amount of the major equipment has been delivered. Air handlers, electrical equipment, generators, most of the big equipment has been delivered. The curtain wall that encompasses the building, separates it from the external elements, is most of the way complete, just a little bit. And I'll show you a picture of it here in a minute. As we get through the next couple of months, we'll start doing a lot more of the interior fit up. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this, when a shop pops up, well, there we go. An exterior image. At this point, you can kind of see the curtain wall. What's left to install is really the portion of the work over top of Concourse C there to the lower right. Most of the rest of the building is fully enclosed. It actually, over the last week, enclosed some of the gaps that were left in the curtain wall to get some of the major pieces of equipment in. So building should be enclosed by end of October. Next slide. Here's an image of the interior construction activities. You can see there's a lot of work. You remember what we showed the last couple of months. You see the concessions fit up occurring there in the center section. A lot of the openings for the biophilia and the trees are being built. Actually, ticket counters, we're starting on the openings for the bag claim device and the ticket counters. Just about a week ago, started major sections of terrazzo flooring going in. So a lot of the movement of the equipment is to get out of the way so we can put terrazzo flooring in and then work our way around as we keep moving forward. Next slide, please. And then this will be an image of looking towards kind of a Concourse D, looking back towards the security. And you see, again, the framing there for the stairs and the concession framing. You see a lot of the lights have been installed. Just a lot of work ongoing. Next slide. So today we're asking two things. The first was security scanners. With the newer scanners are much better for people with mobility. If you remember today's scanners, you've got to hold your arms up. Anyone with shoulder problems, it becomes an issue. These, your arms are at the side. They're much easier to get into and out of. They're an open architecture. The budget for this was included in the port procurement, so it's not an additional cost. We're just transferring that money over to the JV to make the procurement. It's just a more efficient way to make it work. Next slide. The second section here will be the Loyal Legion fit up. And as Caitlin talked about, a lot of the details is just the electrical, the architectural. Really, we are building the space for Loyal Legion, including the kitchen and all of the components associated with the kitchen. Next slide. Big picture on budget, we are on schedule. We are on schedule right now to complete phase 1 in May of 2024. And then we'll work our way in through phase 2 as we get going, which will complete the end of 2025. Next slide. From a budgeting perspective, and we've talked about TCOR a lot, we're on budget on TCOR. On the Loyal Legion, what I want to focus on there, I think it jumps out, is the contingency item. On the surface, that appears to be very low, but within the construction budget, there's an 8.5% contingency for design development. We established this budget based upon the 60% drawings. As Caitlin said, the 90% drawings are done. We're put in for the city. We'll then take those, or the Hoffman-Skanska team will then take those and bid those out there for the subcontractors. We think that'll use some of the contingency, but that's what it's allocated for. So we are committed as a team to maintain the installation budget at $8.5 million overall. Next slide. Overall, Hoffman-Skanska contract has been $1,771 million today. We'll add another $10 million, so $1,781 million at the completion of this. Next slide, please. And recommends approval of the executive director's recommendation. And any questions?
Just one, thank you very much. And I know this is just a revision to the current agreement, but I'm curious as to how they're tracking against small business set aside.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Thank you. The Hoffman-Skanska team is committed to 18 to 22% for this amendment themselves. I think they can meet. I'm a little trouble with smaller electrical contractors. There's just so much work going on in the city. Overall, right now they're committed to about I think it's like $240 million overall of small business in the contract, which is I think between 18 and 20% overall.
George, this may be a subset of that question. So generally, and this goes to the Loyal Legion build out, does the concessionaire choose who's doing their build out generally, and are we doing this differently because we're paying for it now?
Normally, the concessionaire chooses because of the speed of getting this done and trying to make sure we were ready to go. It is being managed through the Hoffman-Skanska, so they'll select. But we are working very closely with the concessionaire on the design and the installation.
Okay, thank you. I guess I want to think about in future, if we're going to open the possibility of this program, right, that if we're using our vendor, it's likely to be a larger one, which may take an opportunity away from a smaller construction company. So really thinking about it as we move forward. Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Mann?
I do have one question about your consultants' fees for $200,000 for this floor. Yeah, can you explain that?
That's the design of the space. So that will be reimbursed to Loyal Legion because they've fronted the cost initially for the design.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion and second to approve the amendment to the Hoffman?
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries and we adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.